for this wonderful landmark convocation of our deanery. Today is with very great pride that I introduce our speaker, Joyana Jacoby Dvorak, a social justice advocate. She's also an educator and a researcher. Joyana is a local daughter, raised in Stevens Point and educated in our Stevens Point Catholic schools in theology and sociology, eventually on to DePaul University, where she was awarded her master's degree in nonprofit management. Joyana is also certified in Ignatian spiritual direction from Loyola University. Joyana has accumulated a very formidable, varied, and interesting career background. She lives out her commitment to linking faith and justice. After college, Joyana served in central Mexico as a Good Shepherd volunteer. She then went on to work for the Chicago Archdiocesan Catholic Campaign for Immigration Reform and the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. She's worked with grassroots community organizations in the Chicago area, working towards comprehensive immigration reform. For the past 12 years, you would not think Joyana is old enough to put in 12 full years, filling a variety of roles at DePaul University in Chicago. She currently works with the Division of Mission and Ministry as the Associate Director of the Vincentian Service and Formation Team. Through this program with her work, she engages with communities in the United States, El Salvador, and Colombia. She invites her university students to explore what it means to be a Vincentian leader and to connect that wisdom to their life. Joyana is also an adjunct faculty member at DePaul in Catholic Studies in the Peace, Justice, Conflict Studies program. She teaches courses that focus on Catholic social thought, social justice, and Vincentian leadership. She has conducted research as well, most recently focusing on listening to the voices of the communities that host DePaul groups. St. John Berchmann's Pastoral Council has benefited from Joyana's service on their Pastoral Council as the co-chair of the Peace and Justice Commission. Joyana is married to Dave. They were awarded the Christi Fidelis Archdiocesan Award in 2016. And last but definitely not least, Dave and Joyana are the parents of two wonderful children, Teddy and Jenny, ages 7 and 4. Please join me this morning in welcoming Joyana as we listen with our minds and hearts to her stories of challenges, success, and lessons learned on this journey towards justice. Joyana?
So as we begin this morning to take a time to go back to the roots of our gospel message of justice, peace, solidarity, and love, I want to invite you all to your first invitation on this journey towards justice. Naming and honoring the deep wounds that are still present on the land on which we sit today. Land acknowledgement is a small step to move towards restorative justice and healing. And as we gather, we're reminded that Stevens Point is situated on treaty land that is steeped in rich indigenous history and home to many First Nations peoples today. As a people of faith, we have a responsibility for the stewardship of the land on which we stand. And so please, at this time, take a moment of silence to acknowledge, to honor this ancestral Ho-Chunk and Menominee land and the sacred lands of all indigenous people. Thank you. To be radical is to go to the roots. And it is a gift to be back home here in my faith community, the roots of where it all began, my own journey of justice. So this next hour, I need to prepare you. I'm going to try to cram everything that I normally do in 10 weeks with my students into a 1-hour session. So we're going to go through a lot. But the bare minimum at the end of this hour, I hope that you have a bare basic understanding of Catholic social teaching and why it matters. I hope that you have a chance to explore charity and justice, including systemic change. And I want to give some tools for your toolbox, inviting you to go within and reflect so that you all continue on your own journeys towards justice. I also hope that each of you will really take this opportunity to reflect on your own roots of what you are being called to do as co-creators of another world that we all believe is possible. As you engage today, I want you to pay attention and be curious and watch your own internal reactions to anything that I might share. If you feel any resistance to something that I'm sharing, simply notice it. Perhaps write it down on that scratch pad that you received. Pay attention to those internal stirrings. Staying curious is one of the secrets of honoring dignity and building the kingdom. Now, a few things I want to be upfront about. The first is that I am only here because of the many people who have shaped and formed me and shown me what it means to live the gospel message. This includes people in this room, friends from Stevens Point, from this community. It includes people I've encountered in El Salvador, in Mexico, in Colombia, in Chicago. My greatest teachers and guides on bringing to life Catholic social teachings are those on the margins, the most vulnerable, those whose stories are not told. I wish that all of my friends could be here this morning with all of us to share their stories, and I hope that I honor them with the wisdom they shared that I'm sharing with you. Secondly, I need you to know that the Jesus that I know and I love was a brown-skinned refugee who befriended outcasts and sinners and was publicly executed for his non-violent love. It is this story of revolutionary love that motivates me to live a faith that does justice. And yes, my 4-year-old Ginny has a much more accurate depiction of Jesus, the historical Jesus, than most of the images that we see today. And finally, I have a confession. Carol and Karen know this. I told them this up front, but you heard in the introduction that I worked on my parish council and was the chair of the Committee for Peace and Justice, Quasi Justicia, for many, many years. And then I resigned. Let's be honest, folks. When you sign up for the parish council, it becomes a lifetime sentence. And in the midst of raising 2 children, working full-time, teaching part-time, in a culture of toxic individualism, it became too much. And so I hope today to share some of the lessons I learned, why I got burnt out, so that you don't follow in that same path. And I hope that I can at least share some of the secrets that I learned along the way. So there was one success, though, when I was on that committee of what happened. So we're going to begin with the success story. One of the campaigns that we started in my parish while I was on the committee was this campaign called Who's Your Neighbor? Who's your neighbor? We realized we were showing up to church, sitting next to the same people sometimes in the pews, and didn't even know each other's names, let alone the stories behind those names. And so we started the simple practice. At the beginning of each liturgy, turn to your neighbor, introduce yourself, share a little bit of how you are today. This was accompanied by some bulletin reflections and articles where we invited different people each week to share who they are, and also to share about our brothers and sisters in stories of Catholic social teaching in action. So right now, we're going to get to work, good people of God, and start building this kingdom. Because someone once told me that justice begins with a name. With a name, you begin to honor the dignity of the person who is in front of you, and you begin to listen to their story. So I'm going to invite each of you to turn to your neighbor, to share briefly your name, and perhaps to share a little story about part of your name, so that we can begin to build this kingdom here and now. So I'll model what it might look like, all right? My name is Joyana Ruth Jacoby Dvorak. Jacoby is still in it, legally, it's still in my name. I use she, her pronouns. Thankfully, my parents did not listen to Father Lyle and named me Hildegard. That would have been my name if you listened to Father Lyle Schulte. My middle name, Ruth, it comes from my maternal lineage. It's my mom's middle name, and now it's my daughter Ginny's middle name as well. And I shared my gender pronouns, she, her, with you, because what I've learned, especially working with my college students, is about the importance of using proper pronouns to create an inclusive community where all are welcome. So let's practice. Turn to your neighbor, share your name, and share just a little story of any part of your name for just 2 minutes. So find a name. If you need to group up with someone, go on and group up. This afternoon, we're going to have more opportunity for some deeper dialogue. So this was just a warm-up for all of you. So thank you. Look at this, Kingdom Builders. You've already started. So we know in our times that we are living in an incredibly fractured, polarized, isolated, and with broken social fabric all around us these days. And much of our work is about restorative justice and remembering the church as people of God. Remembering. The word remember comes from the Latin root recordis, which means to place again in one's heart. To place again in one's heart. And so I want to start with you by sharing some memories, some stories on my own journey towards justice, to place them again in my heart. And starting all the way back to St. Michael's Hospital, You see Father Steve Bryce and Father Lyle Schulte somehow snuck into the hospital room with champagne the night that I was born. So that's way back to the very beginning. Along with this image of my baptism, my parents chose to have me have a full immersion baptism. I think I'm still a little wet behind the ears. But it's a reminder that all of us, our journeys towards justice started in that baptismal moment, when we were named priests, prophets, and kings. And much of my early faith formation started right around my dinner table. The Jacoby household, anytime there was a missionary who came to speak at St. Joe's Parish, my mom, the Jacobys, would always welcome the missionary to our dinner table to feed them, right? Someone needed to feed the missionary person, so we always got that job. But it was by that invitation and by that modeling of my parents of radical hospitality that I began to hear stories of the people of God walking and serving all over the world. And that lit a fire within me and a deep desire to someday want to go and experience beyond my own culture and comfort zone. Another thing that happened at home is that we didn't eat grapes. My parents wouldn't let me eat grapes. I liked grapes. Whenever I went to a friend's house, I loved eating their grapes. But we didn't eat grapes because we were standing in solidarity with the farm workers and Cesar Chavez, and by not eating grapes, we were saying help the farm workers by not buying them. It's our daily choices of where we invest all of our resources that make the difference of working towards justice. And it can happen anytime you choose to spend your money. How are you socially consciously shopping? How are you thinking of the farm workers even today? And the third memory was a memory where life is lived forward and understood backwards sometimes. It was a trip I took in 8th grade that was organized by Greg Hansel. It was called the Chicago Experience. We went to Chicago. We got to experience a different reality, different cultures, different neighborhoods. What I actually remember from the experience was roller skating. We roller skated with these youth in Chicago. But the important piece to this story is that we invited those youth to come to Stevens Point and have their own immersive experience here. This idea of encounter, of mutuality, of having kinship and accompaniment is in my roots of understanding how we're called to build this kingdom of God. Now, of course, it takes all of us children a time to appreciate our roots, right? And after I graduated Pacelli, I was ready to fly the nest and go out into the world to experience something new, discover something different. I went to Marquette University, so not too far away, and I went in with this desire I was going to major in biology, and I was going to solve world hunger. I was going to do it, folks. I was going to solve world hunger. And then that first semester in the library, studying biology and chemistry till all hours of the morning, I decided I did not want to study biology and chemistry anymore. All due respect, Professor Drosky. And I soon admitted that even though I was resisting studying theology, it was in my blood. It was how I lived and breathed and saw the world. And so I chose theology and sociology with this idea that sociology would help me to understand the structures, the system, how people in our world interact, and then I'd use theology to fix the world, right? That was my next vision of how I was going to use my life. Very naive vision 20 years ago, and yet that mix of sociology and theology is still true today in how I live my vocation. And those conversations that I heard at my dinner table from all over the world began to come to life with Catholic social teaching that I got to dig into and study. I remember paging through this book in college. You'll see all my notes, right? And becoming alive to read these church documents that were speaking to the signs of our times, that were relevant to us here and now. there's some good stuff. There's really some good stuff in here if you take the time to read it. So here we go. This is the part where I'm cramming in 10 weeks into 10 minutes. You ready? Catholic Social Teaching 101. Something that's really key and critical for all of you who chose to come to this session. Catholic social teaching is not just the job of those of you who sign up to serve on the Social Justice Committee at your parish. This is a non-negotiable part of all of our calls as Catholics. It's non-negotiable. It's a constitutive, it's a big word, constitutive element. It means you can't get rid of it. So we see here, we believe that social teaching is central, not fringe. Social ministry is integral, not optional. It's the work of every believer, not just the mission of a few committed people. So that's a relief, right? You all aren't all the only ones who are responsible. This is everyone's work. So we're going to just watch a really quick, so the problem is that people don't know about Catholic social teaching. They call it the church's best kept secret. The best kept secret. So today it's not going to be a secret anymore. You're going to leave with a little understanding. And this little video is a really quick overview. Again, that could be taught in many, many courses. So let's take a look at this.
We make many decisions every day, some apparently simple. What do I want for breakfast? How will I get into the city on Saturday?
Some are more complex. How should I respond when a coworker makes a racially charged remark? What kind of a career should I pursue?
But how often do we pause to consider where our food comes from? Or the environmental impact of our travel?
In choosing a job, do we think beyond the paycheck and consider how workplace cultures can elevate some people over others? Or how our work might contribute to the common good?
Catholic Social Tradition, or CST, invites us to ask questions like these. It begins with the Gospels, what Jesus said and did. As a living tradition, CST also includes the teachings of the Hebrew prophets and 2,000 years of people responding to Jesus' example and teaching.
In each new generation, the Church continues to develop CST through social teaching documents. For example, Pope Francis in Laudato Si calls us to care for the earth as our common home. And in Fratelli Tutti, he challenges us to treat all people as our brothers and sisters, no matter how different we may seem.
When people talk about Catholic social tradition, they often talk about principles. But it's more than that. It's a call to action to create a more just world, an invitation to be part of a living tradition, and a challenge to think and see anew in light of a biblical vision of justice.
CST helps us think beyond ourselves. It doesn't give us all the answers, but it helps us question the easy answers that pass as conventional wisdom. And it stirs us to work toward a world where every single person has a seat at the table.
So a couple key takeaways that I want you to get from that video that was just shared. First of all, Catholic social teaching is addressed to all people of goodwill. So even though it says Catholic, it's actually all people of goodwill. Many of the students that I teach at DePaul are not Catholic. They come from all different backgrounds, and yet the wisdom that is within all of these documents applies to all of humanity. So it's for anyone. As was named in the video, it's about these principles, concepts, ideas, theories, the doctrines that deal with human life and society as it's evolved over time. So more and more documents continue to be created. Fratelli Tutti, Laudato Si are the most recent ones that Pope Francis wrote that are responding to what's happening in our world now and also building on the many modern social teaching documents that came before them. So you'll often see that they're referencing other documents that perhaps other popes or bishops had written, and they build upon that. Catholic social teaching gives us this ethical foundation, right? It's kind of like this yardstick that we can use as we're looking to contribute to the moral and social analysis that informs political and economic decisions. Now you heard in the video too this idea that it's rooted in Scripture, right? That's where this all started, folks, was from Jesus' message, from the prophets. That's where it begins. It builds on it with the church documents, the different principles, and then looking at the issues and what we often refer to as the signs of our times. Now, one of the documents that the bishops wrote specifically for people of faith who are building these social justice committees in our parishes was a document called, here it is right here, and if anyone wants to read it afterwards, you're welcome to. It says, Communities of Salt and Light, Reflections on the Social Mission of the Parish. So this is a really good starting point for all of us, if you're interested to hear, well, what's the wisdom from the bishops on this idea of gathering together? And they have a framework of these foundational things that are really important. Praying together, reaching out together, learning together, and acting together. Within that, they also have a lot of resources of what does that actually look like to bring any of those ideas to life. So that's, again, wanting to put a resource into your toolbox. We Are Salt and Light is a really good one to go to. Now, when we look at the scriptures that I mentioned, this is from this document, just a little taste. They talk about how in the Gospel according to Luke, Jesus began his public life by reading a passage from Isaiah that introduced his ministry and the mission of every parish. The parish must proclaim the transcendent message of the gospel and help to bring good news to the poor in a society where millions lack the necessities of life. Bring liberty to captives when so many are enslaved by poverty, addiction, ignorance, discrimination, violence, or disabling conditions. Bring new sight into the blind. And in a culture where the excessive pursuit of power or pleasure can spiritually blind us to the dignity and rights of others. And to set the downtrodden free. In communities where crime, racism, family disintegration, and economic and moral forces leave people without real hope. Again, you hear how we take the words of Scripture and apply them to what's happening in our world today. If you were to boil down these principles of Catholic social teaching, sometimes there's 7 of them, sometimes there's 12 of them, sometimes there's 8 of them, but if you were to boil them down, it comes to 2 main principles. The first is this idea of human dignity, that the person is sacred and made in the image of God. With this is this idea of human dignity having a consistent ethic of life from womb to tomb. So honoring the sacred dignity of every human story is core to Catholic social teaching. The other core element is this idea of the common good. My dad always says the key to Catholic social teaching, the word that's really important here, is this idea that we are social. We're social beings. We're made to be together. We're made to connect together. We're made to collaborate together. And we're also made to have a vision of how can we create this world where everyone is flourishing, where the most vulnerable are thought of first. For me this morning, in a really personal way, you putting on your mask is a part of common good, protecting my children who are most vulnerable right now. It's always keeping that eye out for the most vulnerable. And with that, it's this understanding that we belong together and need each other. You may have heard of this word Ubuntu from Desmond Tutu, which talks about this idea, I can only be human if you are human and who you are. I am because you are. This is key. This interconnectedness is key to our understanding of Catholic social teaching. All right. So that was the overview. Now I know it's the time where you're getting sleepy, so I'm going to ask you all to stand up. Everyone stand up. Here we go. And this invitation, this exercise is going to be an exercise. Do this to whatever ability that you are able. I don't want anyone to be hurting themselves. And if you just need to do it in your mind and not with your physical body, that's okay too. So how do we actually begin to put Catholic social teaching into action? What does that actually look like? So I want to invite all of you to stand on your right foot as best you can. And as you're standing on your right foot, think of, recall, remember all the times that you have been a part of charity work, where you have been a part of serving the needs of those in front of you. Maybe it was working at Bootstrap. Maybe it was having a clothes collection. Maybe it was collecting food. Maybe it was visiting someone who was sick. You're serving the immediate needs of whatever was in front of you. You're responding with acts of caritas, of charity. So bring those memories to your mind, to your heart. Notice how you're feeling on that foot. Okay, put that one down. Now go on your other foot, your right and left foot this time. This time, call to your mind and heart any memories you have of working for justice. So this is where you are working to change systems and structures. Maybe you called up a representative and let them know about a policy that you feel deeply about. Maybe you went to a protest. Maybe you organized people to develop a plan to transform your community in some way. Think of memories of justice, of how you've been an agent of change in some sort. Notice how you're feeling on that foot. Okay, now put that foot down. Now I invite you to just stand on the 2 feet. So 2 feet. And notice how that feels compared to how I was feeling on one foot and the other foot. Just notice. Okay. What did we notice? What did you notice when you were standing on one foot? Either one. Shout it out.
Unstable.
Unstable. Thank you, Karen. How did it feel to stand on one foot?
Uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable?
Old.
Oh, that's fair. Yeah. Yes, painful sometimes. Yes. Other sensations of how you felt on that one foot, either the charity or the justice foot.
Dizzy.
Tipsy, dizzy. Okay. And any notice of, was there one foot where you thought of more things than the other foot?
Yes, I felt inadequate.
Felt inadequate on which foot?
More on my left.
More on the left foot, of the justice foot, okay? What else came to mind? Hearts, on either foot.
I don't think I ever did enough with the left foot stuff.
Didn't do enough with the left foot stuff, okay. How did it feel to stand on both feet? Secure, grounded, good? Yeah, okay. All right, we can sit back down. Don't worry, we're not going to make you all over. So this is the idea of the 2 feet of social ministry, or the 2 feet of social change. We need both of them. If we're going to be grounded, if we're going to be stable, if we're going to move forward, we need 2 feet to do it. And there's going to be times where we're going to be using one foot more than the other, right? This idea of we have to respond to the urgent needs that are in front of us with acts of caritas. And there's going to be other times when we need to lean into and learn a little bit more about these systems and structures, what the church calls our social sin, that also needs to be addressed. We need to ask, well, why are people hungry in the first place? Why are there people who are living without homes? Why is there all of this injustice? Asking those hard questions that get to the root is critical to then dreaming about how could this look differently. Now, I know in my own experience, that I had a rich experience of having the direct service encounter when I lived in Mexico for several years. It was that opportunity where I got to listen to hear, to be with the people in Mexico and understand more what their realidad, la realidad, looks like, especially from la perspectiva de la pobreza, the perspective of the poor. But when I returned from Mexico, I had a very different call than when I went. Oh, here we go. I forgot I had this slide. All right, let's go back 1 minute. So charity. Charity and justice. Oftentimes, with charity, there's a them and there's an us. We're giving to those people. When we're talking about justice, it's about inviting everyone to the table to be a part of that conversation of how do we want to transform these systems. And this is a really important image for us to begin to be thinking about in terms of who are we inviting to the table to even join in these conversations of how we might build something together. So with that, our dear Frederick goes on. So I come from the Vincentians, St. Vincent de Paul, and Frederick is one of our Vincentian guys. And he speaks really clearly to the point that charity isn't enough. Charity isn't enough. We need to also be asking these bigger questions about the institutions. Right? So this gets to what I was naming before, the importance of asking those why questions. So with that, when I returned from Mexico, I knew that no longer was I going to be doing the direct service, the direct charity to that particular community. But I had a different call, and the call for me in Spanish was voy a luchar por y con ustedes desde el otro lado. I'm going to work for and with you from the other side. I had to shift my energies from direct service to policy work. And you heard in the introduction that Karen shared that I worked on comprehensive immigration reform, and I worked with these incredible sisters of mercy who not only were on the front lines offering charity, but also were listening to the systems and structures that needed to be changed. Now their story could have been a whole talk. Let me tell you, folks, I had like 10 talks planned for you all. So these are the little nuggets that got the Holy Spirit put into what today is. But a little story from them that I want to share is that they recognized that when immigrants were detained, when they were released, they had no place to go. They had no clothes, they had no food, they didn't have anything. They didn't have anything. And so they started talking about that need with other faith communities within the Chicagoland area as well. And over time, they created a whole new nonprofit that's called the Interfaith Committee for Detained Immigrants, which was all about creating a network of people of good faith and goodwill, just like all of you, who would be ready to respond if someone was released and didn't have what they needed. It's literally a phone chain, where you get on the phone chain, and if you're on call that day, then you figure out who has the clothes, who has the bus tickets, who has the resources, and can get them to the person in need. Key to this story, though, that was one response that they had, but they also recognized that it wasn't possible for clergy or lay people to go in and to minister to the detainees when they were actually in the detention centers. There was a law that they could not be served in that spiritual way. So Sister Pat and Sister Joyana, you know what their motto is? We go respectfully and peacefully, but we never take no for an answer. These are 80-year-old guys who began to lobby and build relationships with and talk to their representatives to begin to develop a new law that eventually they passed over many months of hard work and getting right in front of the people who were making those law decisions to say that all should receive the spiritual needs that they need. And yes, the clergy should have the opportunity to go and to serve and to minister to those who are being detained. But there's a video series that, again, because of time, it's something that I encourage you to watch. It's called The Sisters Sent a Message. And the title for today, Prayer, Presence, and Perseverance, comes from the inspiration of their story. So that is, again, it's 5-minute clips that me and a colleague developed together that tells the story of the Sisters of Mercy and the community of faith responding to that particular need in both a charity approach and this approach of changing the systems and the laws. All right, how are we doing? You still with me? Still with me. And take a sip of water. Here we go. There we go. Okay. Now, you've heard me say that key to Catholic social teaching and to the work within parish ministries is listening deeply to and be ready to respond to the signs of our times. The pandemic has revealed in ways we couldn't even imagine the depth of division within our country and even within our communities. And as we examine the signs of our times, there's an urgency like no other to respond to these realities of climate change, the gap between the rich and the poor, realities of voter suppression and inequitable education, the countless Black and brown lives who have been killed. And in preparing for today, something that I felt a real urgency to share with all of you, my beloved Stevens Point Portage County community, is a shift in my own journey towards justice as I grapple with my white identity in ways that I haven't before. For many white people, the murder of George Floyd was a new awakening to how deep racism is in our country and systems. This tragedy has called for white bodies to begin to look within and examine in deep ways how we contributed to the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Adam Toledo. This was not new news to our Black and brown brothers and sisters. They have lived with this realization, oppression, and constant threat to their lives since the founding of this country. And as my colleague, Minister Janae, a Black queer woman, reminded us, it could have just as easily been her. And how would we be responding then? For me, as a woman of faith, a believer that another world is possible, and a mother raising 2 beautiful, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, white children, teaching kindness is no longer enough. It's also my responsibility to teach, yes, starting at 4 and 7 years old, how we are deeply caught in the idea that white people's ideas, thoughts, beliefs, and actions are superior to people of color and their ideas, thoughts, beliefs, and actions. I need to explicitly teach Ginny and Teddy now that because of the color of their skin, they will be treated differently than our dear neighbor Anna because we are part of the white supremacy system. Now I need you to stay with me, folks. This might be a moment where you might be feeling a little resistance as you're hearing me name and claim in new ways that I am a racist, that I'm part of a white supremacist culture because every day I benefit from my unearned privileges as a white body. Now, if you're getting turned off by this word, stay with me and try to listen underneath to the wisdom that's behind this. Stick with perhaps prejudices or biases. We all have prejudices and biases that we all hold. So don't lose me here. When I first said that word, white supremacy, you might have thought of these very overt actions of hate crimes and lynching or the KKK. Those might be the images that flash through your mind when you hear that. And there's also this covert, socially acceptable white supremacy that is in our everyday lives. And as you look at this, these are patterns and behaviors that are part of an age-old system that permeates everything. And the longer you swim in a culture, the more invisible it becomes. You don't even realize that it's there. You don't have any idea. And for me, these past 2 years, even though I had lived in other countries, even though I had worked with many different communities of people of color, this year has invited me to dive into my own prejudices and biases and my own participation in this system in ways that I wasn't aware of either. And so I'm inviting you to lean in a little bit with me to this morning, wherever you may be on your own journey of discovery. And let me just share one simple example of what I mean by this. Like, Joyana, really? You're a white supremacist? You're a racist? Come on, Joyana, what are you talking about? Let me show you just one simple example. So a reminder that when I say the word systems, when we talk about a system, it's about the steps in a process, right? The steps in the process of how you get somewhere and what might be different for some people rather than other people. So my husband Dave and I had planned for a long time to buy a home. We lived in a one-bedroom condo in the city of Chicago with 2 children, and then a pandemic hit. Imagine a one-bedroom condo with 2 children, virtual learning, 2 people working from home, right? Like, it was time for us to move to a new space. And we had prepared for years to do that. And the steps along the way show very clearly how we benefited because of our white skin. So, did we need a quick pre-approval for a loan with no questions asked? Check, no problem. 1 phone call, all set. How about not experiencing discrimination from a real estate agent by having them be able showing us places all over the city, anywhere we wanted to go? No problem, no discrimination. Do we have the ability to set aside savings every paycheck? The ability to save money every paycheck? Check. This is a huge privilege we have. Did we have generous relatives, God bless Great Aunt Marge, who shared her resources with us and giving us a base for a down payment? Check. We had a great down payment because of Great Aunt Marge and this generational wealth that was passed down. How about good credit? Because we always had fun to pay those bills on time, so didn't have to use our credit card and not pay it. Check. An expedited loan approval process because of that good credit. Check, check, check. It goes on and on of this list of unearned privileges that we had simply because we have been part of this system. Now, the gap between white and black home ownership is wider now than it was even in the 1960s. Hear that again. The gap is wider between white and black home ownership now than it was in the 60s. The present day disparities that we have in health and wealth and social mobility can be traced back to the 30s when neighborhoods were redlined. If you don't know that word, write that on your page to follow up on that. It was this racist practice where banks would draw red lines on a map around the neighborhoods with populations of color, restricting lending in these places, and then starving them of investment for generations to come. The median white family holds 10 times the wealth of the median of black families and several times that of the median of Hispanic families. This is the contrast. If my friend Minister Nene had tried to go through all those steps of that process, it would have been a very different process. Now, the bishops have called us to action. In their pastoral letter in 2018, right, they wrote about this idea of opening wide our hearts, the enduring call to love, which is a pastoral letter against racism. So in 2018, they wrote about this. And they name very clearly that it's love that compels each of us to resist racism courageously. To resist racism courageously. It requires us to reach out generously to the victims of this evil and to assist the conversion needed in those who still harbor racism and begin to change policies and structures that allow racism to persist. It takes courage. When you begin to learn about, well, what's the antidote to racism? How can I not be a racist? We realize this idea of anti-racism, really at the heart of it, Jason Reynolds talks about, it's just this muscle in our body that says all humans are human, no matter what color your skin is. It's I love you because of who you are. Ibram Kendi has done a lot of work educating all sorts of people on these systems and structures of racism. And what's good news for us is that being a racist or an anti-racist isn't a fixed identity. There was a couple moments this week where some of my behaviors were racist. And then there were other moments this week where I was acting in a courageous anti-racist way. And the good news is that it's a journey that we're going to continue to be on together as we become more aware. We heard about self-awareness this morning, of even what it looks like for us in our own lives. So when I talk about a journey towards justice, folks, there's no end line. This is a constant process that we are all on together of reflecting and acting and reconsidering and dreaming of how do we move forward together as a community. Well, I don't know about you, but there are many moments in this journey as I begin to realize the immensity of these structures and these systems that I feel what Martin Luther King Jr. calls a paralysis of analysis. A paralysis of analysis where I just get overwhelmed. I get tired. I don't want to learn anymore because then that means I've got to learn how to be different in this world. And so with that, as we move towards how do we move forward, as Catholics, it's not an option to stay stuck in that paralysis. And, oh, I'm not doing enough, or I didn't do enough, or I don't know where to begin. No. As people of faith, we've got to figure out how to get moving together. And to keep us moving, to keep us envisioning this world, we need to root our communities in prayer, in connection, in community. We also need to honor the Sabbath in different ways. It's very easy for folks involved in social justice to want to do all the time, and then, like me, they get burned out. Learning to be contemplatives in action. Taking that time to put your ear to your heart, to open your ears to the world, is critical if we're going to be in this for the long haul. And folks, we've got to be in this for the long haul. I don't know if you've seen those reports about what's actually happening to our world and how there might not be a world anymore soon if we don't take action for climate change. We've got to root ourselves in prayer and community. Father Paul is this priest at St. John Birchman's, and he's a retired pastor. And when I first started on the pastoral council, he said, Joyana, all your meetings, half of them need to be prayer, and then you can get to the action. But you need to at least be praying together for half the meeting. I did not like that advice. That seems like a lot of waste of time, of spending all that time praying when there was so much stuff to do. And yet, as we began to integrate this part into our meetings, where we would pray together, we would build community together, we would listen to what was happening in each other's lives, always bring treats, right? When I was someone, I always bring the treats. And then we would move forward to whatever was on the agenda for that day. And somehow, the work always got done. And it got done better than we could have imagined because we opened that space for the Spirit to be working in and through us. There's many ways that we can pray, together and individually. One of the ways that I've been praying is an Ignatian practice of the daily examen, but doing a daily examen of the daily ways that I have been part of racism, part of these systems. So it's taking some of these time-old spiritual practices and bringing them to our reality here and now. For me, another thing the way that I pray is how do I read the news every morning? It's no longer with the newspaper for me, right? I'm scrolling on my phone in the morning. But can I read the news with what Karl Barth invites us to, with a newspaper in one hand and the gospel message in the other? How do we read it through the eyes of Christ and see and hear and listen to the cries that are coming from the newspaper every morning? And pray with those cries, along with pray for what is our call and our response to action. Sometimes for me, praying has meant moving my feet. Frederick Douglass talks about this idea that praying for freedom never did me any good till I started praying with my feet. Started praying with my feet. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel used this same metaphor when he said, as he was walking with Dr. King and Selma, I felt my legs were praying. Yes, sometimes marching together is a form of prayer and resistance. What I especially have been learning on this journey is the importance of creating these spaces for restoration and healing. And that begins in each of you, in your own way. Recognizing that the Sabbath is actually resistant to our capitalistic society that says we always have to be producing something. Right from the beginning, God got it right when she decided to create on day 7 a day for rest. The Sabbath is an important time for us to restore and heal ourselves. So, to summarize, some lessons on the way from this journey to justice. These are things that, again, you've heard me talk about with stories this morning. This idea that it starts at home with our daily decisions. All of us have an ability to leave today and to start being change agents by what we're doing at home. The importance of learning people's names. This invitation for you to take that simple practice, not only to your faith community, but to your neighborhood. Do you really know your neighbors? Can you really ask them for a cup of sugar? If not, why not? Cultivate community, always bring the treats. Be contemplatives in action. Integrate, don't isolate. This work is for all of the committees in your parish. Think about how is this integrated into liturgy? How is this integrated into the social committees? It needs to be integrated. Content counts. Spend some time with these documents. They're really great. There's a lot of wisdom there. Charity and social service, we absolutely need to continue with that, but it's not enough anymore. Listen first. Show up. Build networks and be ready to respond. But it starts by listening, especially to the voices on the margins, the voices that are ignored and not uplifted. That's where this work begins. Remember that we can't do everything, but we can do something, and take time to celebrate. This work is meant to be a joyful work. An organizer in Colombia talks about this idea of organize your anger, right? If you're mad about a system, you're mad that people are hungry, organize that anger, but defend your joy. As gospel people, we are called to do this work in a spirit of humility and a spirit of joy. So the final story I want to share with you is a story that very much shapes my understanding of how we share the many resources that we've been given. And it's with this little girl, Yasmin. She was 8 years old when I lived in El Salvador. She would accompany me every day. She'd pick me up at the bus. She'd take my water bottle, and she'd take me to wherever I needed to go to do home visits with that community. There was one afternoon where we were going to a soccer match, and we all piled into the back of this old pickup truck, and you're hanging on for dear life as you're going through the mountains of El Salvador. And I see Yasmin, and she's got something in her hands. Now, you have to understand, Yasmin always is dirty. Her hair is always a mess. Like, I don't want to know what was under her fingernails, but she's picking at something in her hands. I'm like, Yasmin, what are you doing? I realized that it was a grape. that she had, and she was just kind of picking at it. I'm like, just eat the grape, Yasmin, what are you doing? But then, as I watched, I saw her break the grape in half and offer me a half of it. She had a grape, folks. She thought to offer me a half a grape so I too could share in the deliciousness and joy. If Yasmin can share a half a grape, which was all that she had, we too can share of the fruits of our love and our labor, and we too can be co-creators and builders of this kingdom of God that, yes, we believe is possible. Thank you. So in terms of where to go from here, these are just a couple places to begin with. In terms of what our church is already doing in really great ways, resources that are already out there for you to tap into and to begin to explore. There's many, many more than this, but these are some that are my go-to places of where to begin to see what does this faith that does justice look like, and how can I get involved in that as a contemplative in action. I'm also happy to be a resource to talk more. I've got a whole bag of books. I am my father's daughter. And can also engage if you have specific questions and such. I'll be up here at front to answer those.
Thank you, Joyana. Let's give her another round of applause. For the wonderful lessons you've shared with all of us as we journey towards justice. We're free to move out for lunch now. Just a reminder, at 1 o'clock, the next breakout sessions will start. So enjoy your relaxation time. Please visit the tables that are in the lobby. And we hope to see you back for the second session this afternoon.